Welcome to BookEnds Online Edition, produced by the Wadena County Historical Society and Traveling Storyteller in collaboration with the New York Mills Regional Cultural Center. BookEnds is made possible by the voters of Minnesota through a grant from the Five Wings Arts Council, thanks to a legislative appropriation from the Arts and Cultural Heritage Fund. BookEnds programs from previous authors are now available on the website of the Wadena County Historical Society, and that is www.wadenacountyhistory.org. Today's program will also be available on the website shortly. We can't say exactly when, but hopefully shortly. This month's speaker is Mary Logue. Mary wrote her first mystery when she was in sixth grade, and it was about a mysterious trail around a pond. And she went on to write about mysterious trails, particularly around Lake Pepin in her Claire Watkins mystery series. Now she has a striking new heroine, a young Irish immigrant caught up in a deadly plot in 19th-century Deadwood, South Dakota, and her newest book, The Streel, that's published in May 2020. We have BookEnds occurs every month on the second Saturday at 11:30 a.m. For the time being, it's by Zoom, but eventually it will be in person. And next month's BookEnds will be April 10th, and an interview with a children's author, David La Rochelle.
Wonderful.
So, well, wonderful for you being here. If you have any questions for the author, feel free to enter them through chat, and I'll keep an eye on that. I'm a poet. I didn't know it, but funny. So if you'd like to order books, you can do so through our bookseller, Traveling Storyteller, at gmail.com, or you can just talk to Gillette and she can do that for you. So now let's welcome BookEnds Online Edition, Mary Logue.
Well, thank you. Thank you all so much. It's a great pleasure to be here, but I have to confess that I would have liked it to be in person more. As I mentioned earlier, I'm an extrovert, which is a little unusual for a writer. So I do miss all the stuff that goes on around this, and I'm glad I get to see some of your faces. I usually actually the way I started writing was through poetry. In fact, I remember even though I wrote my first mystery when I was 12, I wrote my first poem when I was about 8, and it was entitled How I Cried When My Little Bird Died. So yes, poetry has always been the basis of my work. I grew up in Lake Elmo, Minnesota. The pond in my mystery was the pond that we had in our backyard, and in Lake Elmo. And so I'm from Minnesota, went to the University of Minnesota, born and bred, but I've traveled and lived other places a lot. I lived in New York for about 4 years and worked at the Village Voice and worked for Simon & Schuster and had a great, way too much fun. So I came back from there so I could get some work done. And Peter and I live with a wonderful writer named Pete Hopman, and he and I have bought a house down in Tucson for a few years and did the snowbird thing, and then realized moving 2 businesses was just way too hard. And so we're pretty much back here permanently. But then I did pick up a little house in Stockholm, Wisconsin, which is our getaway. And it's on the Mississippi, just 2 blocks up from the Mississippi, in a little teeny town of about 66 people. And it is where my Claire Watkins mystery series has been set. But just so I could continue to live in Stockholm, occasionally I changed the name of the town to Fort St. Antoine. So, but people are still always guessing which person I'm writing about. Well, I'm going to start out the way I love to start out. I call myself a stealth poet. because even though most people want to hear about my mysteries, I really love to sneak in some poems because I think we don't get enough poetry, period. And especially in these trying times, I think poetry is a good resource. It often helps us, acknowledges our troubles and helps us see a way through them and just gives us kind of a reality check on life. So I'm going to open with, this is a book that just came out this last year called Heartwood. And I'm going to open with the first poem in the book, which is called Ordinary. I wanted to name the book Ordinary. And Peter said I couldn't do that. He said, you cannot name a book Ordinary. That's just not a good title. So I made it the first poem in the book, Ordinary. Any ordinary day contains a chance of whimsy. The usual things can turn so that even getting out of bed becomes an adventure. Remember, the slippers are two wool rafts bobbing on the ocean of the floor. Try to stay upright. Determined to move forward. Know that tap water is an endless stream that flows through your hands all your life. The walk you take so the dogs can pee on someone else's grass is the walk you are still taking since that first time you fell forward and caught yourself by putting a foot out. The next day, you ran away and you've been running ever since, because that's all this life is. And there's no such thing as an ordinary day, only pearls in a necklace of devised divisions. That marked sun, moon, no moon, breath, no breath. Was there a dragon on that? What did you guys hear that background noise? No.
Yes.
Yes. Okay. Hi. All right, so I do want to talk about the Streel, but I kind of want to talk about how it came to be, because, you know, the journey, people are always saying, you know, how do you get your ideas for your books? Well, when I wrote the first book in the Claire Watkins mystery series, which was called Blood Country, you know, one of the reasons I had written 2 standalone mysteries, and one of the reasons that I decided I wanted to write a series. And so I knew some things. I knew I wanted to have a female main character. I knew I wanted her to have a reason to be looking into mystery. So I made her a deputy sheriff. I knew that I wanted her to have a child, so I gave her a daughter. I knew I didn't want her to be married, so I killed off her husband before the book started. And so I knew a lot of things, and I had just bought my house in Stockholm, Wisconsin, and was so interested. Now, I'm pretty much, well, I would say at that time, especially, I was more a city girl. I had lived in New York for 4 years. I lived in South Minneapolis. But I had grown up in Lake Elmo, which was more the country. And but I was fascinated by what it was like to grow up in such a rural area, and how information moved around this little town that I had found myself in, how everybody knew everything about me, and I could never figure out how they found it out. And so I was just really interested in writing about what it would be like to be a deputy sheriff in a small rural community. And the land, if any of you have been down around Lake Pepin, Red Wing, Wabasha, those are cities on the lake, just how beautiful it was. And I really wanted to write about the landscape of that area also. So I wrote Blood Country, and I wrote 9 books about Claire and her adventures and her mysteries. And then I got lucky enough to get a grant from the Minnesota Historical Society to write a book about my grandmother. And so my grandmother was the postmistress in a little town called Chicago, which some of you might be familiar with because you're not too far away. It's right by Morris in the bump. I always tell everybody, you know, Minnesota, it's in the bump that goes into South Dakota. Or is it North Dakota? Anyways, so I did a lot of research on, her name was May Kerwin. And Kerwin is a good Irish name. And I'm Irish on both sides of my family, and Peter's already corning a beef in the refrigerator, and I will always make my Irish soda bread when St. Patty's Day comes. But I did a lot of research to find out how I came to be in Minnesota, you know, who had come before me. And the more I did research into my relatives, mainly came over not during the first potato famine, but unfortunately, there were more than one potato famine in Ireland. And so I was really fascinated by trying to put myself in their place. Like, what could that have been like to go to a strange land and leave your family behind forever? Because most of these people would never see their country again, would never see their family again. And the closest I could come to imagining it for us right now actually is going to the moon or going to Mars. I think that is almost the only equivalent we can get now, because again, with Zoom and everything, we're so connected. It isn't like we would lose what the early immigrants lost when they came. So I also really found out how much I love doing research. I was just going in to find out who my grandmother had been. I just got so fascinated by the little stories that kind of spun off from her life. And so I decided, I really decided I wanted to do something historical so I could do more research, because it was just fascinating to me. And I had never really, you know, I did research for the Claire books, but it was very contemporary research, and it wasn't the same as kind of digging into newspapers and diaries and journals and photographs and all that. So I decided I wanted to write a series. The Streel is the first in what will be a series with Bridget. And I took family names. So her last name is Reardon, which is a family name of mine. And I named her Bridget because Bridget is one of the Irish saints. And the more research I did about the Irish at this time, was really interested in the prayers that they said all during the day. So there would be a prayer for milking the cow, and a prayer for lighting the fire, and a prayer for going to bed, and a prayer for getting up. And I just loved that notion. So I named her Bridget Reardon, and the book opens when she's leaving Ireland with her brother. And I think Bridget is about 16, I can't remember. And Seamus, her brother, she was 15 and he was 16. Yeah, so they leave Galway in 1877. And so this is the book, The Streel. And I should tell you about the title. So when I was doing research on my grandmother, I came to see that I had Irish Gaelic words in my vocabulary that I did not know were not English words. And one of the words that I had in my vocabulary was Streel. And it was a word that my mother would call us girls if we weren't properly put together, you know, with our hair all fixed up and looking good. She would, if we were going out and our skirt was too short and our hair was too messy and we were wearing too much makeup, she would look at us and say, "Oh, you can't go out like that. You look like a Streel." Well, so finally, I looked up the word in the Oxford English Dictionary and found that it was not a really nice word. It was, it comes from, it means a slattern, a slovenly woman, a harlot. So, that just kind of really tickled me. that was the word my mother was teasing us with. And I'm not even sure she knew what the word meant. So I wanted that, I knew I wanted that word in there somehow. And I really love the idea of naming a book a word that most people looking at it would not know what it meant. Because I love the idea of the title of the book pulling you into the book. Like, you're like, why is it called the Streel? So you have to open the book. And again, I really believe titles are extremely important for books. And I love the idea of pulling the reader in to the book that way. So, and so the cover of the book, if you can notice, which I love, is from an old tin type that I had found. So again, while I'm doing research, I'm looking through all old photographs around that time period. I like to see what people were wearing and how their hair was and all that. So I found a picture of a young girl who looked like the way I thought Bridget looked. So this is the full tin type. Can you see that pretty well? Yes, yeah. She looked to me like what I thought Bridget looked like. So I brought, when I was talking to my editor, it's published by the University of Minnesota Press, which is lovely because I get to go and see them and talk to them and they listen to me, which is unusual with New York publishers. I brought in this tin type and they got really excited about it. But as you can tell, they didn't quite use the whole thing. And I love that. Again, it's the mystery. It's the almost knowing. It isn't maybe something I would have thought of, but when I saw the cover and what the graphic designers had done with it, I was very, very happy. The other thing that's kind of interesting, it's hard to see, but it's called a Deadwood Mystery, and the two O's are kind of right where her eyes are. I think they had a lot of fun doing this, doing the cover of the book. That's kind of how it came to be. Now, the reason that I said it in Deadwood was, as I was doing this research on my grandmother, I was really interested to find out how my relatives, my ancestors, had come to America, and then they lived in Pennsylvania for a little while, and then they moved to Wisconsin for a little while, and then when they were in their late 60s, they took their 12 children who were grown by then, and all of them moved to Chicago, Minnesota. And again, it's just, so interesting to think of how brave they were in a way. I mean, to continue this movement. And so as I was doing research about my grandmother, I also was so interested in what could have been the next steps for them. So, and I really, really liked the idea of my series following the westward movement, if you will, of us European immigrants. I was going to say something about that. Also, the name, again, I'm really into names of books, and the name of the book of my grandmother, Halfway Home, comes from Chicago, because Chicago is the Lakota Sioux word for halfway home. So I bring Bridget goes to New York first in the book. I'm giving nothing away. And then she travels, and she's there momentarily, and then she comes across to St. Paul, and she gets a job with the Hunt family. And the Hunt family were really based on the Hill family of St. Paul. I did a lot of research on what they were very wealthy. They lived on Summit Avenue, and and she was a maid there. So I was really curious doing research on, what that would have been like for her to be a maid in a wealthy family. And the Hills, or the Hunts in my story, her brother has gone on ahead of her, and Seamus, with two guys they met on the boat, are in Deadwood. And the family she's staying with, she got the job because Seamus knew the family, and that's how she was able to get a job with them. But she decides then eventually to go on to Deadwood, and that's where most of the book is set. Now, why Deadwood? Well, I think the Black Hills are pretty amazing, and again, such an interesting enclave, and it would have been a natural progression for her because at that time, the gold rush was going on in Deadwood, and but the other reason was that my guy Pete likes to play poker. And at that time that I was working on before I was working on the book, the only place you could play poker close by was in Deadwood. So we had gone to Deadwood a few times. I, however, after losing $20 in the slot machines, I'm done. That's enough fun for me. And then, so I, of course, just kind of moseyed around town and went to the museums and looked at things in the old buildings and everything, and really just thought what a strange and interesting place this was. So that's how I ended up bringing my character to Deadwood. And again, it was a very important time in Deadwood. The gold claims, the mining was really going on. I did a lot of research on that to try to understand even how they mined, because there were different ways of going about it, a pit mine or mining, panning for gold. So anyways, that's how the setting, the main part of the book is set in South Dakota. So let me just go on and talk the teeniest bit about so what's going to happen next. I'm in process. I'm 200 pages into the next book, which at the moment is called The Big Sugar, which is another colloquial expression that most people I don't think know. And you'll have to read the book to find out what the big sugar is. But, and it's set in Cheyenne. And believe it or not, I was lucky enough to be able to go down to Cheyenne. I drove down with my sister fairly recently, or actually last fall. And did some research and hope to get there again. But again, this would have been a natural progression for Bridget after Deadwood. She leaves and goes to Cheyenne. And then I'm hoping to take her to Salt Lake City and then on to San Francisco. And if I live long enough, then maybe she'll go back to Ireland. We'll see what where her adventures take her. But I'm just enjoying the book the series so much, and really, really love writing about, the western part of our country, which I just think is beautiful and stark and kind of scary and really interesting. So I would love to answer some questions if I can go on and gab some more, but anybody?
We'd love to have you do some readings too.
Oh,
that would be great.
Yes. Well, let me read the beginning. Let me just see here. I would like to read the beginning of the Streel. Okay, I'm going to read you just the first few pages. So it opens chapter 1, Galway, Ireland, May 1877. When I was 15, pardon me, I'll start again. When I was 15 and my brother Seamus 16, we attended our own wake. Our family was in mourning as they were forced to send us off to America. All the day and night, people came into the house. Seamus listened to the stories with father and the men, and they all acted brave and talked of the wonderful things to do and see in America. Seamus paid them little mind, but the women wailed and worried as if we were dead and gone, and talked of how we would be missed. They all of them talked about us as if we were not there. While I was scared to my bones, I held myself very tight together. I knew this was my chance to make good. I would not end up like my Aunt Mary, who was a widow, left roaming the streets of Galway, or like Biddy Rafferty, whose husband beat her when he wasn't too far gone with the drink. And I never wanted a child of my own to die like my sister Kathleen at age 2 from the cholera. And certainly, as much as I loved her, I did not want to end up like my dear mother, whose heart had been broken too many times, having watched 2 of her children die and now 2 of us leaving. She had my younger sister Mary by her side and the 2 boys, Sean and Peter. As the potato blight had struck again, the English landlord of the estate where we lived and worked determined he must rid himself of his tenants. Not enough he had taken our land. No Irish could own land. But when these terrible times struck, he sent us away so he wouldn't have to feed us. He gave mother the money to send Seamus myself away to America. My mother blessed him as if he did it for our own good. In part of my heart, I did also. But in another part of me, which is dark and deep, and I hope God never knows of it, I cursed him terrible for the tearing apart of my family. Another famine had come upon the country. My father said it was not as bad as the great one, the Black 47, but still people were starving in the ditches. And there was talk of a terrible plague starting up in Limerick, as if we Irish had not endured enough. Our landlord claimed he had little food to give us, so we gathered seaweed to eat and the few slimy potatoes that were left in the field. With 2 fewer mouths to feed, our family would be better off. So many of our neighbors had fled to America that as their stories came back to us, I felt I knew the country. I was often asked to read the letters home because I had some schooling. Mother took education very, very seriously. She herself had learned to read in English from her father. Not that she had much time with field work and the children. Father spoke Irish most of the time, but mother insisted we children speak in English. She said it was the only way we'd get on in the world, for the English ruled our land. The letters from America told of hard work, scullery maid, laundry worker, serving girl, but also of the money that followed. I kept remarking on the many opportunities for young girls. I knew that if those girls could do it, so could I. With my learning and not half bad looks, I would prosper. Maybe I would do it by marrying a rich man. Maybe I would find a way to start my own business and make enough money to bring over my whole family. After all, my name was Bridget, named for the goddess of poetry, midwife to Mary, and the saint with the holy mantle. She was a protector of all that was good and wise. My mother had always said that I was brighter than the moon in the sky. In many ways, the day of my wake was when my life began. I had come into womanhood only months before. As she showed me how to care for myself during that time of month, mother talked to me of men. She said, watch out for the charming tongue. They will woo you and they will want you, but if you give in to them, they will leave you worse off. Before you do anything, pray to Saint Bridget. When we left the next day, my mother cried as if the heavens had broken and were pouring through her. I could hardly stand it. Even Seamus looked away. My father was still smelling of the wicked poutine he brewed himself, but he tugged on my hair like he always did when he was pleased with me and called on God in Irish, Diolin. When I stood at the stern of the ship and watched the land slip away, falling into the stone cold sea, I wondered if I would ever return. A mist covered my green Ireland, and I watched until my eyes blurred over. I watched until only the spires of the cathedral poked at the sky. Then they too vanished, and we were at sea. I crossed myself and said a short prayer for my travels. I was going to this new country for a new life. I swore I would find it. Even though Seamus acted as if I was a bother, I could tell he was glad to have me on the ship with him. He patted me on the head and said, "We will be back with bags of gold." I laughed. I liked the idea, but I never believed in the gold. Soon I saw the air was clearing. Blue sky stretched out all around us, a good sign. I felt into the pocket of my cape and touched the small packet of dirt that my mother had put there. "Don't forget Ireland," she said. "Don't forget us." Thank you, thank you. So they're off. I didn't want to skip the part of the journey over. To me, that felt really, really important. And, now we fly over the ocean, we almost think nothing of it, but it was hard. It was a real journey for them and not a pleasant one usually. So that needed to be part of what the book was about. And it is where she and Seamus meet Patty and Billy, and they become friends with them, and they continue throughout the story. So, yes.
I have a question, and it's kind of going back to writing. At the beginning, you were saying that you already knew all of these things about Bridget. So a few years ago, when I was at a talk presented by Lois Greiman, she was talking about transitioning from writing romances to writing mysteries. She said the hardest part for her was you had to kill somebody off. You had to pick somebody and they had to be dead. So did you also know everything about the person that would end up being dead? Did you have the whole backstory for the dead body?
I knew some of it. I often think I know. The end, kind of. I know the beginning. When I start a book, I usually work on a book for almost a year before I start writing it. So I'm gathering, and I just do a lot of thinking and playing in my mind. And so let me think. I'm trying to think if I knew who was going to be killed. I'm pretty sure I did. Yeah, because I think I somewhat set up, and often there's more than one person, but I taught writing mysteries at the Loft, and it was always so interesting, some of the conversations we'd get into about, well, you could kill them that way, but have you thought about, some of the crazy things we end up talking about killing people. Very, very much gallows humor completely. So for me, it's always a balancing act between what I think I know and then what starts to happen as I'm writing. And I often feel like I said, I know the beginning kind of, and I kind of know the end. So I think it's good to at least think you know the end, because then you have a direction you're going. But I'm also, I think it's just like life, have a plan, be ready to go forward, but be open to what happens along the way, so that because I tend to be can be a little tight and not as flexible. I've really had to learn to be flexible in writing, because often things, even as I'm writing a scene, something will happen that I did not expect. And I know it can kind of sound woo-woo, but I think, you know, our minds are kind of amazing things, and they do a lot of work that we're not completely aware of. And so often they'll, you know, all of a sudden I'll come up with something I hadn't realized earlier that just totally makes a scene work.
I think characters really do take on a life of their own.
Yeah.
I find even as a reader, there will be things that the author hasn't mentioned, but as I meditate on the characters that I'm reading about it, I will flesh them out my own way in my mind. And then I'll talk to somebody else about the book, and they'll talk about the character in a completely different way. And I'm like, no, that's not the Bridget that I read.
Yeah. I think you've really hit on something too. I think it's one of the reasons we often have trouble reading a book and then seeing the movie. And you know, it often isn't that the movie isn't good. It's that it contradicts some of our creation, you know, that and you know, again, when I'm teaching writing, I say, you know, one of the greatest tools we writers have is our readers' imagination. In other words, we just give you a tidbit and you do the work. You know, it's kind of like that. If I tell you she was wearing a red ribbon in her hair, you would expand on that. You would create, you know, more than, you would run with it. And so really, I often try not to get in the reader's way a little bit, you know, to leave room. I really feel that way about sex scenes, you know. Why make it cut and dry, you know? Do enough so that the reader can then go with it, because they'll do a much better job than we can do.
Sylvia Engdahl, who wrote some young adult science fiction books, she actually had this whole essay about how she doesn't describe the physicality, the physiognomy of any of the beings. We get to decide how humanoid they are. Are they humans on a non-Earth or what? She really,
yeah. That's really, really interesting. Yeah, you know, you can, and I think some people have even done that with, you know, contemporary novels, not really describe the character. But again, for me, a lot of times, some of their physicality, knowing something about their physicality, plays into the story. So it's almost a landscape that I like to describe too.
It's a balancing act.
Yeah. Yes, it is. And again, it is going back to what we've been talking about, to give the reader enough so they feel present in the scene, in the book, but not to give them so much that they're bored or it kind of, it stops the motion. And one of the things when I'm teaching, I often talk about giving things as a blob or scattering. So if you're introducing people to, like even in that scene that I just read, you know, while you might not have, I didn't really talk about the presence of where they were, but you got a sense of the gathering by some of the details that I gave you. So, anybody have?
Yes. Oh, do you have a question? No. Sharon, it says it's still mute. You have to unmute.
Can she unmute or does
It
someone?
should be right at the bottom on the left. Oops.
There's Sharon. No, Now somebody else is talking.
Gillette's moving her mouth, but I don't know that she's talking to us.
I'm always talking. Sometimes it's outside my head, but most of the time it's inside my head. Fortunately for the universe.
Yeah. I had a question sort of about, we usually ask authors about their process, their methodology, like, you know, when they write, how they fit it in, how they do their research. Like, did you get to travel? Did you get to go to Ireland to do some research for this? Or, you know, what sort of process do you go through to sit down and write a book, I guess?
Oh yeah, you know, it's so interesting too, because process really does change too. And I think sometimes I get asked that question, how do you write a book one page at a time, you know, but also as if there's a magic there. And, you know, I wish there were, but it's just putting my seat in the chair and doing it. But I will tell you a few things. One is I've been to Ireland many times. The first time I went to Ireland, I was 20, and it was illegal to drink in Minnesota at that time. And so I had my first legal drink in Ireland in a small pub. And so I was going to meet some friends there, and they didn't come on time. So I ordered a pint of Guinness because I knew Guinness was something. So I ordered a pint of Guinness. So here I am, you know, I'm a young 20-year-old, and I'm sitting here with my pint of Guinness, and I'm sitting next to this guy. He was kind of small and he was older, redhead, and he keeps kind of looking over at me. Finally, he turns to me and he says, "I'm sorry, miss, but I've never seen a woman drink a pint of Guinness before in my life." And I had no idea I was doing anything unusual. But it was just after, you know, women didn't used to be able to sit in the pub. Like only a year or two before I was there, the women had to sit in the lounge, and the men sat in the pub. So even me sitting in the pub was a new thing for the Irish. And I've drank many pints of Guinness since that time. I went on a wonderful wild and woolly trip to Ireland with my mother and her two sisters, my two aunts, and a cousin, and my sister Dodie, and we rented a van. And I'm telling you, it was a wild scene because every night we went to a pub, and every night my mother and her sisters ended up singing in the pub to everybody that was there because they knew all the songs, and it was totally a gas riot. I also did some research at Trinity Library in Dublin, but yeah, that was kind of but getting back to how I work. So, you know, I think about a book for a long time, and it's really interesting, the funny little tidbits I get. I might get a opening of a scene, I might get a line that somebody says. But when I finally sit down to write it, I have tried to write outlines of my books, but because I think that would be so cool. I mean, how great to have an outline. But what happens is I write the outline. So say I'm going to have 30 chapters, I write a 30-chapter outline. And after I get about 3 chapters in, everything changes. So I have to rewrite the whole outline. And then I get about another 3 chapters, and then everything changes and I have to write a new outline. So now what I do is I write an outline of 3 chapters. I've learned. So then 3 chapters, then when I get there, then I write the outline for 3 more chapters. So again, there's a certain amount of trust that goes into not having everything figured out, you know, to know that things will come to you. So I tend to write, I try to write 3 pages a day when I'm really working on a book. there's a lot of other work that goes into being a writer. So, but when I'm cranking on a book, I try to write 3 pages a day. And I can write those 3 pages at 8 o'clock in the morning when I get up. I can write them at noon. I can write them at 8 o'clock at night. It doesn't really matter. And I don't tend to be one of those structured people that do it at a certain time. Because I just really acknowledge all the work I'm doing around. I mean, taking my dogs for a walk, I get so much work done on my book. I just, it's to have that open mind, just things come. Driving in my car is the other place where I do a huge amount of work. I drive down to Stockholm, Wisconsin. It's an hour and a half. I get a lot of work done. And I really give myself credit for that work. So, yeah, writing a book really, different people handle it different ways. But for me, that 3 pages a day is very steady. The other thing is I live with a writer. So he knows what I'm doing when it looks like I'm not doing anything. I mean, we give each other a lot of space, and we can kick things back and forth, but we often save each other. So I might have him read the first 30 or 40 pages just at the beginning, so I'm not making a huge mistake. But then I tend not to let him read anything until I'm done with a good rough draft, because you can only read a book once as a new reader. And so much of what I want from criticism is, where did you get stopped? Where did you come out of the book? Where did you get confused? And that's first reader information. And so I really try to, we both try to not tell too much or talk through too much, because we want them to experience the book as a new reader.
Cool. Did you still have a question, Sharon?
Yes, can you hear me now?
Yes.
I missed some because I kind of lost you, but when you sit down to write, do you write at the computer?
Sharon, really good question. I mainly do, but I always have, I don't see it around here. I always have a notebook. So when I am starting a new book, I always get a notebook, and that is where I keep notes, and sometimes, often it's where I start a scene. I find the blank page of a computer more difficult sometimes to cross than the blank page of a regular piece of paper. So again, I often will start a scene in my notebook, but pretty quickly I will go to the computer. I wrote my first novel on a typewriter. I don't ever want to go back there. And the ability, the flexibility of writing on a computer is just stunning. I don't think we lose anything. I'm just really happy. So again, I got a Macintosh computer the very first day they were available. Literally, I was living in New York, and I have never looked back. So the computer is my friend. However, poetry, I write out. I don't ever write poetry on the computer. I will then bring it to the computer to type up. And that's actually really helpful for me, because anytime you can get yourself to re-see what you've written is really helpful. So even me typing a chapter on my computer and then printing it out, even that distance will help me see it again. Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Did anybody else have any questions? Lida.
Well, I was just going to say, I agree about poetry, writing it that way, but I've done a lot of writing too in my life. When I wrote stories and articles for paper, even in the very beginning, I came up with a method of writing on the computer that didn't distract me into editing at the same time, which is the problem. As I'm kind of farsighted, and so when I take off my glasses, I don't see very well up close. So it's good enough to see the keyboard and to make sure your fingers are on the right keys, but it's not well enough to really see what I've written.
Oh, I love that. That is so you've really got even one more remove. You're not even seeing that. So then when you come back, maybe, because often what I do is I'll write 3 pages and then the next day I revise those 3 pages and then I write the next 3 pages. So that gets me into the story. The other thing I was going to say is, partly because I live with another writer, we write every day. We don't, we don't, we'll take days off. I'm not saying we, never take a day off, but weekends aren't significant to us. And I really advise my students to write most days. If they're working on a novel, you stay in the world of the book. If you take too much time off, then you have to kind of rethink where you are. But when you write every day, you almost fall back into that world very easily.
About how long does it take you to write 3 pages? Because it sounds like, wow, get that done and you got the whole day, nothing to do.
That's right. Well, often not long, but often I'll putz around with them, but that I know it doesn't sound like very long, does it? But sometimes, and again, I do tinker a little bit. I'm sometimes going back and even now, it was funny, before we started talking, I was looking at the next book on my computer, and I had reread the opening of the Streel, and Bridget's voice is so strong to me in that opening of the Streel that having read that, then I went to the next book and I felt like I did some editing, even though I'm 200 pages in, I was editing the beginning because I could hear her voice in my head and I wanted more of that voice, so.
Great.
Cool.
Well, we're getting close to the end. Can I read one more poem? Okay.
Sure.
Good.
Yes, please.
Good. I'm going to read the last poem in the book, and it was written quite 4 or 5 years ago, but unfortunately, it's awfully appropriate to where we are right now in our country. It's called Verbena. Sitting by the glowing fire, I pour hot water over fresh picked verbena leaves, ovate shaped prickled skin blade, with winter still here, but not for long. The water in my cup turns light green, shantung silk, smells of grass, lemons. The fire broods like the fading sun. I drink this soft brew and listen to the rich-throated woman singing about Harlem on the radio. Dark pressing on the windows, and not all is right with the world. Hurricanes have battered the South, and today we learn an earthquake has wiped out whole villages on the other side of the earth. But I drink my tea slowly, knowing I must savor it. That's my life's work, to wring every last drop of joy out of this perfect leaf green tea, fire dying daily. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much. It was wonderful to hear your work and to have you with us.
It was my treat, and please, everyone, let me come back when the next book comes out and I can see you all and we can drink some Guinness together or something.
This is wonderful because there is a brewery in Wadena fairly new, and a recently opened distillery. So this is perfect. And
Perfect.
we want to bring all the authors that we have only met and got to know wonderfully through Zoom. We'd like you all to come back in real time.
Yes, I love it. I love it. Well, thank you all. Stay well.
Thank you.
Thank
Thank
you.
you.
Your vaccines.
Thank you. Thank you.
Yeah. Bye-bye.
Was very
Bye.
good. Goodbye.